Hi there, I'm Abuisa Webb. Thanks for joining us for a sort of special edition of the Niagara Broadsword Academy. Today I want to take a moment to talk about how the Niagara Broadsword Academy specifically, and in general HEMA, benefit from racism. First, it's important to define the difference between promoting racism and benefiting from racism. Of course, the Niagara Broadsword Academy and most HEMA schools ban racism outright among their club members and in their clubs and in their tournaments and in any possible setting. They try their best to prevent racist acts from occurring under their aegis. Now, this isn't always enough and it doesn't always address the problem, so today I want to talk about something that's not that. I'm talking about how HEMA, in the Niagara Broadsword Academy particularly, benefit from racism. So the first thing that we can talk about in this subject, and keep in mind that I'm only doing a cursory understanding of a couple of subjects to start our journey of understanding how we are impacted and benefit from racism. But the first topic that I wanted to touch on is our sources. The Niagara Broadsword Academy uses a number of sources from the 18th and 19th centuries, and most of our sources are in English, French, and a few other European languages. Now, if you grew up in North America or Britain, you may have studied the likes of Shakespeare, Chaucer. You may have read something like Huckleberry Finn. You may be familiar with an older style of English, a more archaic form of English, and so reading these sources is easy for you. However, that's not always the case for everybody. Why is it at those times in our educational career, even in elementary school or in secondary school, why are we given the opportunity to study these archaic English sources and to make that sort of language familiar to people so that even new students who come in can read these old sources and really understand what they mean, despite the fact that most, many, if not most of the words that are being used in the sources are no longer really used in common day-to-day speech. And the reason is, there is no reason. We could have taken that time to study other local languages. For example, if you live in Western Canada, you'll know that the understanding of French among the majority population is nothing. You can't have even the remotest of daily conversations with your average prairie resident in French, or ask them directions in French. The fundamental ability to communicate in a language that should be one of the official languages in Canada is not there, and that's with an official language. There are plenty of non-official local languages, whether they're indigenous languages or they're languages that are used by predominant minority or in some cases majority cultures, and those languages are not understood or studied. So you have students who are coming to our class with an ability to understand Shakespearean or archaic English without necessarily an ability to get the basic grasp of languages from other continents. That is how, for example, our sources benefit from structural and institutional racism in Canada, because we benefit those traditions at the detriment of others, because of course, you can only fit so much time in a school day. And it's not for any particular purpose. It's not like we use Shakespearean English to any benefit in our societies. It's simply because we have the time and resources to benefit our heritage, and that's what we do. So that's a way in which the NSA in particular benefits from racism, is in the ability of our students and our teachers to understand the sources very easily. Now, some other HEMA schools, they struggle with this exact problem, that the sources are difficult to decipher, require elaborate translations and so on, so they don't benefit in necessarily the same way as the NSA or as other early modern fencing schools do. So we'll move on to museums. Museums contribute to the Niagara Broadsword Academy in particular, the Cataran Society, a number of other historical societies that deal with fencing in a number of ways, including the creation of materiel, the creation of our swords, the understanding of our texts, the ability to research our texts. These all come from primarily museums. Even if you discount the fact that we can get our hands on actual original texts from our period, We can also use very sophisticated and elaborate museum technologies to search our texts, unlike others, because museums have dedicated a lot of time to early modern military history and to European history in general. So that's particular to the early modern, but also HEMA in general benefits from a passive benefit to racism, which is to say, instead of an active amount of time and money being spent on, for example, education in archaic English, instead, what happened is the status quo, what everyone should enjoy, having their cultural heritage and their material heritage available at their fingertips in local museums, that has been allowed for HEMA practitioners and historical European martial artists, and has been denied to others. So our museums, our landmarks, our military sites have not been looted and taken away to another continent, and so by and large we can study them hands-on, and by studying them hands-on we can create more interest, and we can create more accurate reproductions of our arts. So in this way, we benefit not directly from racism, but we have a foot up because of the effects of racism holding other people down by looting their museums and their cultural heritage of the material that they would need to similarly study their own works. So that is in North America, with indigenous people having their materials taken away, oftentimes having bans on certain things like storytelling, dances, language, culture, including dress and weaponry and so on and so forth. So having a regime set out to intentionally destroy those things gives us an advantage relative to them, because they have been put down, and not that necessarily we have been put up, although in other ways we have been put up. So that's how the Niagara Broadsword Academy and HEMA in general benefit from structural racism within our museums and those sorts of institutions like that. Similarly, we have access to our military sites. Here in Canada, we have plenty of forts from the 1900s where we can see places where battles took place, where the general public interest is sort of turned on to what we do. Things like reenactments can take place, reenactment societies can gather around these sites. Sites are important. They remind us, they give us a physical representation of that mental space, and they're important for sort of advertising and a general public consciousness of our art form and a general public appreciation of our art form. So these sites are protected by the federal government in Canada and are supported by the federal government in Canada, and they, generally speaking, support European martial arts, even in places where European martial arts weren't the only ones that were being done. You can go to many of these sites and fire a musket any day of the week, and then they have a special research program or a special public outreach program for some sort of indigenous topic. Oftentimes they'll have it monthly or seasonally, whereas the European martial arts are constant, or the European martial atmosphere is constant. And then every once in a while they'll invite indigenous groups to contribute. So in that way, we don't in Canada have quite the same amount of resources and amount of sort of traditional application and know-how and personal resources put into the preservation of sites that can turn the public on to what we're doing, places where we can practice as well, places where we can sort of feel at home. So in that way, European martial arts in Europe as well as North America benefit from structural racism that literally just puts millions of dollars a year into places we can go to look cool. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how our clubs interact with the community, and it's a little bit more of a practical conversation rather than the really academic and sort of arcane stuff about the institutional racism that benefits us in a really abstract way. So in a very real and material way, you may, as a HEMA practitioner, have had the experience before of someone, well, you go out to an event, or you go out to the public or something like this, and someone catcalls about LARPing, or they say something that leaves sort of a bad taste in your mouth, like freedom or something like that. Those are the sorts of experiences that we have in public as historical European martial artists, but they're not really that much of a problem. There are people in our societies that obviously have a lot more serious concerns about their interactions with the public when they're seen, for example, using weapons, or they're seen in large groups, or they're hanging out at the park even just after dark, which we have done in our club before. And furthermore, interactions with police can go completely different way for different groups of people, right? So I've had the experience, for example, multiple experiences interacting with police, and in general, it's a basically acceptable situation. So we'll have a club meeting in a park, we'll be practicing for a while, someone will call the police because there's a bunch of people fighting with swords in the park. The police will come up to us and ask what we're up to, we'll tell them that we're doing a sport, talk a little bit about the sport, and they'll be on their way. That's it. Despite the fact that we have literal weapons in bags in the public park. So yes, many of the things that we're having are tools. They are sports equipment and stuff like that. But there's a lot of things like clubs and even just a steel broadsword that isn't sharp. I mean, it's a weapon really at the end of the day. So the fact that they are treated as sports equipment rather than weapons is a privilege that we have, and the ability that we have to congregate in those parks and use the parks and just say, hey, you know what? If our club room is closed for whatever reason, we can just go practice in the park, and we can rely on the fact that we can do that. So that's another way that the NSA and HEMA in general benefit directly from racism, and also it's in the individual club members. So I have been stopped as an individual walking at night from HEMA practice to home by police, and they did. It was obviously a shakedown. So I was walking with a bag full of swords down the street near a police station, and a police officer comes out of the police station, stops me, and starts asking some questions. And he wants to see what I'm doing, he wants to see what I'm up to, he wants to see what's in the bag. So I ask him a little bit about what he's looking for, why am I being stopped? And he says to me that someone in the area that matches your description has been stealing cars. So I'm a guy in a kilt carrying a bag of swords. There's a guy in a kilt carrying a bag of swords, stealing cars from around the police station. I don't think that's true, which is what I told him. And then I said, however, if we can be done here, I'll give you my ID that he asked for, and then I'll be on my way. So I did that. I said, I'm reaching in my bag, I'm going to pull out my ID, here you go. He took it and recorded it, and then away I went. That interaction could have gone sideways, because that police officer had nothing to do with someone who's carrying a bag of swords around, wearing a kilt, stealing cars. That's not a thing. So he was clearly just stopping me because I was carrying a bag of swords. You may argue whether or not that's fair game, but the fact of the matter is that the interaction that I had with him, the generally positive interaction, despite me being slightly abrasive, and also the reason he stopped me, both were benefits of racism in Canada. So the fact that he stopped me because I was carrying a bag of swords. I have never been stopped because I was a white guy walking around at night. I've never been stopped because I'm wearing a kilt walking around at night. It's never happened. And I was stopped because I was carrying a bag of swords, which again, you can argue whether or not that's a reasonable reason to stop somebody, but it doesn't have to do with my race. And then furthermore, after a police officer stopped me and asked me what I was carrying, I confirmed indeed I was carrying a bag of swords. He let me go with no problems. And again, I'm not saying he let me go because I was white, but there's a strong possibility that I would have faced a lot harsher of an issue had I not been white. And furthermore, there is a reasonable expectation for racialized people and people of color in Canada to not expect to be able to travel in public safely and effectively carrying a bag of swords. I can get on the bus. I've never been stopped on the bus. I've had bus personnel to ask me about it, but I've never actually been stopped on the bus from getting on the bus for carrying a bag of swords, and I can't say that that would necessarily be the case for other people. So your club, consisting primarily of people who can successfully get to the club without harassment, is a benefit that historical European martial arts has. Your club being able to meet in public if they can't find a place to meet in private is a benefit of racism that historical European martial arts experience. So the point of this video is just to talk about areas where we do benefit and to sort of dispel the illusion that by simply saying, well, racism isn't allowed at my club, that you've solved the problem. You've not solved any problem. You're still benefiting from racism. Obviously, racism is not allowed at your club. That's sort of like, that's a low bar to set. So instead, let's examine how we do benefit from racism and what we can do as a community in HEMA and as clubs in particular to combat that and help other sort of non-European martial artists and other members of other communities we belong to fit into our community successfully and find success without running into the obstacles that we so easily sail over. So that's all I had to say for this weekend, and I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you on Tuesday and or Thursday whenever you see this video. See you guys around.